I think sometimes students get very confused with the wording of the criteria and say, well, why can't they be simpler and I don't know what this means? Well, we purposefully make them generic so that every centre can actually address them in their own way and through whatever theoretical modality that they choose.
Yes.
We don't choose that for them. So they have to be deliberately, what the students might see as a little vague, but what we see as kind of open. So that people can interpret them in their own way. And sometimes students ring up and say, well, what does this criteria mean? And it's quite hard to give a definition because there's no right or wrong answer particularly. And we give guidance for the candidates in the candidate guide as to ways in which they might meet the criteria. But that's not a black and white thing. They could find other ways of meeting the criteria. Yes. And a useful point there, perhaps, is that we put bullet points as indicators of where they might seek the evidence to put in their portfolios. They don't have to meet every bullet point, because then they would be getting hundreds of pieces of evidence.
That's really, really useful. I'm sure those members of our audience who are doing CPCAB courses will be really interested. So, if I'm hearing this correctly, the criteria is a guide to what is wanted, but that can be fitted within these 7 processes.
Yeah, well, they're fitted under the 7 processes. So each of the 7 processes has one or more learning outcomes at level 2, particularly introduction level. I think there's probably only one learning outcome for each of the 7 processes. But as you go through the levels, there's more than one learning outcome for each of the 7 processes. And then the learning outcome has a number of criteria under it. And sometimes it's quite useful if students get confused with the criteria, is to look at the learning outcome and look at the process. What is this about? What am I trying to answer here? Or what am I trying to find evidence for? And that kind of puts it into context.
Yes, that is so useful because there's an overarching kind of, the criteria is the overarching aim, but the objectives are clearly put into the bullet points, aren't they?
Well, the learning outcome is kind of your overarching summary, your overarching kind of theme.
Statement or
You've
whatever.
got your assessment criteria that the students must answer, 2.1, 2.2.
Yes.
But then we have a guidance column with lots of bullet points in that essentially say, if you were going to answer 2.1 here, these would be the sort of things that you might be exploring in your learning review, the sort of things that you might be able to pick up through peer observation. But they need to meet the criteria, but the bullet points are guidance for the tutors, guidance for the students, so that they essentially start to think about the sort of activities they might do to meet those criteria.
Yes, because as you say, it's a vocational qualification, so not everything has to be written. You could audio or video things.
Or at the higher level is things like supervisor testimony coming really useful. They get
Logs of
information
client
from client work, agency reports. So it shouldn't be a qualification where they can just write solidly and get it. They have to be able to do it as well, and that has to be evidenced through other forms.
That's really, really useful. I'm sure our audience are going to be really informed with that, because I think that's a real sticking point. You know, when people see criteria, you use the term criteria hysteria, and being respectful to people who are doing courses, I'm sure it does feel like that. For some,
absolutely.
That and the paralysis of analysis. I think are 2 other ones that really kind of stop learners in their tracks.